So I did a lesson yesterday. Talk about for a minute. It's with a cattle dog named Champ.
Ooh.
Champ's a good dog. He's a good boy. I worked with him when he was just a wee puppy.
Yeah.
A wee puppy. He's a great little dog.
Yeah.
Whatever.
But he's a cattle dog.
Yeah, this was like, I worked with them maybe 2 years ago, right? And they contacted me maybe a month ago, and they said, hey, we're having some issues. We'd like to do a follow-up session. Great.
Perfect.
Let's do it, right? First off, I always tell everybody when it comes to the follow-up session, people always ask me, like, long-term, what kind of training do I need? Blah, blah, blah. I always say, after your initial training program, you shouldn't ever need intensive training again, right? Like intensive training, like the dog, once you finish a training program, your dog knows everything. They know all of the skills they're going to need to know. Training is not a use it or lose it, where it's like if you don't work with the dog for fucking, let's say 2 years, right, that the dog's just going to forget everything and you have to go through the process of training them again and everything, right?
Yeah.
But long term, I always say, if you don't practice this craft every single day like we do, you're going to forget certain things, and you're going to start just maybe slowly over time, like the game of telephone, your communication will slowly over a year evolve into something that's like totally ass backwards from what it originally was, right? And you're going to notice things might just get sloppy, right? So long term, I always tell everybody, like most of our clients, once every couple years will come in for like a brush up session.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes I'll tell people to even like schedule it out where like best case scenario, once a year in fucking January, just give us a call. Hey, let's get our yearly follow-up session on the calendar, even if you're not having problems. Because if you do that, what's going to happen? Excuse me. If you do that, what's going to happen is we're going to get you in. We're going to get eyes on stuff, and we're going to be able to find the holes before they turn into big problems and make the adjustments needed.
For
right?
sure, yeah.
So whatever. I say that because follow-up classes are normal. Needing to come in for a follow-up class once a year, once every couple years, something like that, things start to slip a little bit. Don't get too hard on yourself over that, right? Yeah. But the positive is most of these things are easy fixes. So whatever. So Champ, she was having some issues. He had a couple major surgeries like last year, I believe.
Okay.
And in those major surgeries, he had a really horrible experience at the vet. Like he had to go like 3 times for big issues and complications and stuff like that. He started getting very reactive to touch. Wasn't trying to bite you really or kill you or anything like that, but he would definitely do little things to try to intimidate you to get away if he started getting uncomfortable. And generally what that was he would do the cattle dog thing where if you're petting him and he starts getting uncomfortable, he would just turn around and just open mouth. He wasn't biting. He would just go, ah.
Yep.
Ah.
Oh, I know.
Right? And he'd just like hit you with his mouth, right? And again, it wasn't malicious. It wasn't like he was trying to hurt you or anything like that, but it's still something you can't do.
Yeah.
Right? And he just kind of learned that that's what made people go away if he was getting uncomfortable. So they're like, we're not sure how to handle this, right? So generally speaking, I always tell everybody when I come to do a follow-up session with you post a training program, right? If you're saying, you call me, say, hey, I'm having some issues with A, B, C, or D, right? Usually within the first 4 minutes, I know what's wrong, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times, if we're being self-aware, which is how we're tying this in, right? If we're being self-aware, we also know what the problems are. We know what they are. Guys.
We know.
Right? You know what they are.
Yeah.
So I walk in the house. I walk up to the door. I knock on the door. Champ's not a big barker, but he ran over to the door and he like jumped up on the screen, right? And then she lets me in and I walk in and Champ's jumping on me a little bit. She's trying to get him to sit. She's telling him no, this, that, blah, blah. Whatever,
Yep.
So we sit down, we talk. I'm like, all right, fill me in. What's going on? They're like, Champ is just getting... He's getting kind of reactive towards new people with the touch stuff. He jumps a lot when guests are coming in, and he started getting. So she is she's dating somebody new, and they obviously moved in together with each other and stuff. And Champ is getting a little defensive of her, like if he goes to give her a hug or things like that. Again, he's not trying to bite the guy, but he'll go like jump on him and try to push him away, and just little things like that.
Yeah,
right. So we're sitting there, and I'm like, all right, well, let's talk about me coming in. Because obviously you were throwing a lot of information at him. Heard you tell him no a bunch of times, but he was jumping on me. You know, you were trying to get him to hold a position and he wouldn't do it, et cetera, et cetera. I was like, what was up with that? I was like, what was wrong with that? She's like, I wasn't correcting him. I said, bingo.
Bingo.
She's like, okay. So I just wasn't correcting him. She's like, I feel bad. I was like, but this behavior has escalated to a point now where now it's getting a little out of hand, right? So you got to stop it, right? You can't feel too bad about it, right? So we get into it and we repeat the drill a couple times. He jumped one time. She actually corrected him for it. He's like, oh, okay, I don't jump. He didn't jump again after that, right? I went down. I'm petting him. I'm interacting with him. She's like, yeah, if you get near his belly, that's when he starts getting weird and doing the mouthy thing. So I went and did that. Bingo. He turned around, started mouthing at my hand. She told him no. She corrected him for that. That happened maybe 2 or 3 times. And then he was just fine after that.
Yeah.
He was just fine, right? And we spent the remainder of the time sitting there and just talking about the concepts, getting into, like, when a lot of people tell me, I feel bad that I'm correcting the dog. Generally speaking, what that means is that they're in a position where they have created this thing in their head that you will have to forever and ever perpetually be correcting the dog, which is not the case, right? I always explain, I was like, if you buckle down right now and for the next week, every time he jumps, he gets a correction. Every time he tries to get between you guys in that kind of threatening manner, he gets a correction. And anytime he does the mouthing, he gets a correction. And you make sure your corrections are motivating, it'll just go away where you don't have to give the corrections later.
Yep.
Right. And we kind of we worked through that process a little bit. Past that, I think a lot of people still, because this was with them, right? Like, again, she's with a new guy that I don't know, obviously, and he doesn't know a lot about the training process. He's very, very nice guy, obviously.
Yeah.
But he's asking about the e-collar and this and that. And, she was feeling bad because obviously some cattle dogs too could be a little dramatic with corrections, right? He kind of yips sometimes randomly, even at a 15, right? So I told her, I was like, listen, we explained the process of, like, the vocalization, for example. Under most cases with dogs, when they're vocalizing, when they're getting a correction, it has nothing to do with it being painful, and it has everything to do with it startling the shit out of them, right? So I took the collar off, I put it on my hand, I turned the collar to 100, and I tap it like 5 times. I'm like, tap, tap, tap. And my hand, like, I let a little jolt, like it's a muscle stimulator, right? It creates a pulsation.
Yeah.
But it's not that bad. So the guy's like, oh, man. He's like, can I feel it? I was like, if you want to, here you go, right? Tapped it on 100. He's like, whoa. And he's like, wait a minute. That wasn't that bad. I was like, exactly, right? Right. So you start to explain a lot of these things to people like that. And then, they start to become a little bit more okay with this concept that, again, you're not hurting the dog, right? You're creating something the dog definitely doesn't like. It might startle them. They want to avoid it, obviously. But it's impossible to, like, create an injury with it or create, like, true lasting pain. Like right after you tap it, like, I can tap it 5 times, and the second I stop, it's gone. There's no lingering hurting sensation or anything like that, right? It's just not the way that e-collars work, right? So we kind of explained that. They became more okay with it, obviously. And we just sat and just kind of talked about the issues, right? And explained the process. We explained the biting thing, for example, right? This quirky biting habit that he developed where when he got uncomfortable with touch, he started learning that the mouthing and the biting made people go away. That came out of nowhere. And it happened after those major surgeries that he had to have. And I explained to them the reason why it likely happened is because in the vet, because she told me this even happened, right? They, like, were trying to freaking wrestle this dog and, like, hold him back and stop him from flailing around and all that, where he was trying to get away and could not get away. So he resorted to the biting, and then he realized that worked. So now he defaults to that as opposed to trying to go away when he gets stressed out. Yeah. Right? So as we were working through it, it was cool. This is how we retrained him to just create space instead of reacting if he gets uncomfortable. What we did is I would pet him. I was interacting with him. He came over willingly on his own. I didn't force him over to me. And then when I kind of hit that spot where he wanted to do it, he did it. He got corrected for it, right? Then he did it again. He got corrected for it. After like 2 or 3 times, we're sitting there and I'm petting him and I could see he's getting a little bit uncomfortable, right? I'm kind of like in that spot. but you saw the thought process work. And what happened was he didn't react. What he did was he went to his bed.
Yeah.
Right? So he left me and he went to his bed on his own. Right? I'm touching this microphone. Sorry, guys. Sorry, Peter, if you're watching. So he went to his bed on his own because he realized biting is not an option. Let me try something else. Right? And what he did is he did the exact correct thing. So I said, I was like, that's it. I was like, we're not petting him again right now because he did exactly what it was that we wanted him to do. Right?
Yep.
So
Exactly.
you repattern in the expectation. And the only way we could repattern in the expectation is by taking the dangerous and unwanted behavior off of the table. He's got to realize that that's not an option. We can't just like make it more reinforcing for that to happen because it'll always be in his catalog. He might always revert back to it. Right?
Yeah.
But instead, we made that off the table. So he needed to figure out a new way to cope with the behavior. And this is where a lot of people will give you a hard time with like corrections. They say, well, you're just suppressing the behavior and it'll show itself elsewhere.
Yeah.
That's true to an extent. Right? There's always, this is another thing. I don't know if you got to this in the Ty Lopez episode or not, but he was talking about like extremes. He was referencing I think like politics and like, extreme feminism or extreme right-winged people or extreme Democrats or all these different extreme opinions. He said, you always have to be aware that there is a small hint of truth behind everything that anybody's saying in the extremes, right?
Yeah.
The problem is it's just been taken too far, right? So let's look at the, getting to when you talk about like force-free ideology and the things people don't like about punishment and training tools and all of those types of things, right? The one thing they say, like I said, is if you suppress the behavior, it'll show itself elsewhere.
Yeah.
Again, true to an extent, right? As we're suppressing an unwanted behavior, we have to be mindful that if we take an option off the table, especially when you're dealing with like emotionally charged behaviors. So he's uncomfortable, he's very stressed out, and he's learned this behavior makes the stress go away, right?
Okay.
We have to look at, okay, I've stopped this behavior. The dog will likely try something else after this, right? Or they will try to channel that stress into something else. And then you have to be mindful of we have to then reinforce that thing. Now, that doesn't mean we're giving them cookies and treats and chicken and all that kind of stuff. It just means that the reinforcement behind the behavior we allow to take place if it's something that we want, right? So in this case, we suppressed the biting, where then his default behavior, the thing he tried, which he was not trying before, was creating space from us. Now, here's where a lot of people fuck it up, right? They'll be petting the dog because it's a training exercise. We're trying to get the dog to not bite when he gets uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So they'll pet the dog will bite, we correct him for it. The dog will bite, we'll correct him for it. The dog will try to get away, but in our mind, we're not thinking about it. We're doing training exercises where I need to pet him to make sure he doesn't bite. So we're like, no, get back here. And we force the dog back over, right?
Yeah.
And then that doesn't work either. So now he needs to try something else. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So we have to be mindful of what is the thing we want the dog to do. We want the dog to make the correct choice when they get stressed. So we have to reinforce that choice on top of punishing the incorrect choice. In this case, when he did create space, we reinforced it by allowing him to do that, which gives him the, okay, I was stressed. I created space. Now nobody's messing with me anymore. Yeah. So he realizes he's in control of the thing happening to him, and we're not just forcing it upon him constantly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's like the ways that he can deal with it, you're just literally stripping it down, so he has no options at the end of it.
Yeah, because if you force it too much, especially with the interaction and stuff like that, there are no options.
Yeah.
Right? And yes, I do think there's something to be said about, let's say he was doing it, let's say one of my dogs was doing it to me, right? Like if I touched them in some way that like wasn't crazy, but it was something I needed to do. Like I'm gonna pet you sometimes, right? And he was stressed out or uncomfortable from it, and he was resorting to biting and stuff, right? And let's say it's nails. Let's say hypothetically, I'm trying to do one of my dog's nails, something I need to do. I can't just say, well, you don't want me to do your nails, so I'm not going to do your nails. Right?
For sure.
In that type of situation, yes, with my dog, I am going to want to some extent, figure out a way where, you can't bite, right? But you also can't just leave.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I got to kind of look at then at that point, I am going to hold you to a little higher of a standard, and you can't, you can't bite, and you have to allow me to do this.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to take a little bit more of just kind of a forcing it kind of mentality with it, but I'll focus on making the experience, making sure nothing scary is actually happening in the experience, because I am forcing the dog to just deal with it. Right.
Yeah.
So I'll be mindful of maybe I'm not going to cut the nails so short where there's any sort of chance I might accidentally make it uncomfortable, right? Maybe I'll focus on the first handful of times, maybe not getting super forceful with restraining them and stuff, maybe just getting them used to the noises and stuff of it, right? I could work at a little slower of a pace, but I am going to make them just kind of deal with it a little bit more. But with guests, your guests don't need to do that, right? If your dog hypothetically just like goes in another room and stays in another room on their own when guests are coming over, like that's fine.
Yeah.
Like it's not like your guests don't have to interact with your dog.
100%. Yeah.
Right? So that's how we worked through those issues with Champ. And like I said, that I think was a very interesting one, because as we're working through it, she's like, well, what should we do moving forward? Because we ended on a great note. She's like, what should we do moving forward as far as like, follow-up session? Should we do another one in a week or 2 weeks? I was like, there's not really a point, because here's the thing, right? Like, you already knew what you needed to do. You just needed me to kind of remind you and help pep talk you up to understanding why you need to do it and just doing it, right? So you need to just kind of work with this for a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And if you run into a problem, realistically, what would happen is we would do another follow-up. We would come and I would do the same thing I just did today, which is just remind you of it again, which is just you wasting your money then at that point. Right? Yeah. The only time at that point another follow-up session would be necessary is if you work with it for like 3 weeks and you genuinely feel like you're doing everything correct. You're like, I'm doing all the things we went over in the last session, but you feel like there's still some sort of roadblock you can't get past.
Yeah.
But that's very rarely the case. Most of the time, if you really looked at it, there's probably something you're still doing wrong.